Okay, so I remember not too long ago seeing talks from entrepreneurs here at MIT and wondering, how you can go from being an engineering student and doing problem sets and coding a lot to being a startup founder and an entrepreneur and building a successful business. I think everybody's understanding of entrepreneurship starts something like this. You open up Inc. magazine, you hear about someone with a brilliant idea, they start a company, good things happen, then you're rich and famous and people take your picture and put it in magazines. But that said, all these stories seem really distant. Starting a company felt like something that other people did, and that there was this other planet called California where if you're really smart and successful and experienced, then investors will bring you cash by the wheelbarrow load, and then you can start a real company. So what I really wanted to know was, how did these people actually get started? Who were these startup founders before they were heroes and media darlings? How did they cut their teeth? What did they have to learn? And what can I do to get there? How do you go from engineer to entrepreneur? A little bit about my background. So I was a Core 6 undergrad, finished up a few years ago. I've been involved with roughly half a dozen startups in one way or another since I was a little guy. And my first job was at age 14, where I was testing an online game and then hired as a network engineer after I found a bunch of security problems and told the owners about them. So that was my first sort of involvement with a startup. And most recently, I started a company called Dropbox, which is a really easy way to share files across your computers and with other people. And so far, I've taken that from the kind of coding in Boxer stage all the way through raising several $1 million in venture financing, building a team of about 20 people, and attracting a few million users. So, all right. So again, rewind 5 years, in a seat very much like yourselves. But again, a lot of these concepts around raising money, building a team, and starting a real company were completely alien to me. And but now I've been fortunate enough to have a bunch of experiences, and I've done a lot of thinking about what does it take to go from going from an engineer to an entrepreneur, because I mean, as an engineer, it turns out that it's actually much easier to pick up the business side than it is for the business people to pick up the engineering side. And so how can we best take advantage, or how can we best exploit that advantage? And one thing that should be of some comfort to everyone is that, by definition, from Bill and Larry and Sergey to everyone in the room here, everybody starts in the beginning absolutely clueless about how to build a company. And all these companies that you see here have something in common besides the fact that they made their founders billionaires. They were all started by people who had never done it before. And here's one of my favorite quotes. So all the best things that I did came from not having any money and from not having done it before, ever. That's from Steve Wozniak from Apple. And the optimism that comes from inexperience can actually be a big asset. So you're not shackled to the right way of doing things. And one of my favorite quotes from someone who reviewed Dropbox really early on was that the founders are too young and stupid to realize that this idea has been tried dozens of times and has failed. So now, unfortunately, I can't tell you how to become a billionaire, but I can tell you what I've learned along the way as far as connecting the dots. So the first thing you want to do is get in way over your head. The weakness of being an engineer is that you are absolutely clueless about a huge number of things that are absolutely essential for starting a company. But the good news is, for each of these areas, you can learn from people who are the best in the world at each topic just by ordering a book off Amazon. And before starting Dropbox, I must have read around 100 business-related books just to sort of get my feet wet. And when you're first getting started, nothing really makes sense, and you sort of have to absorb things. But after a while, it really starts to come together. And there's just this amazing body of accumulated knowledge about startups that's appeared in the past 5 or 10 years, and I would bet that what has been published in the past 5 or 10 years about startups exceeds what was published in the 100 years before that. So really take advantage of that, and then also the communities here at MIT. So the MIT Club, there's a Web Innovators Group, and a number of other resources of people who really want to help you succeed. The next thing you want to do after sort of learning as much as you can is to take on responsibility. So it's impossible, or at least extremely difficult, to build a company by yourself. As engineers, it's easy to bury yourself in the world of code and technology, where things are like elegant and organized and predictable. But sooner or later, you have to get other people involved. And you have to do things like convince investors to give you money, convince potential hires to drop everything they're doing to join this extremely risky and unproven startup, and talk and learn from customers. So none of these things are done on a computer. So one of the most useful things I did was take on leadership roles in my fraternity when I was here, and I was rush chair. I had a 5-figure budget I had to manage. Never had done anything quite like that before. And if you try to get 30 basically unpaid volunteers to all do the same thing when they have absolutely no incentives, when there's absolutely no incentive structure whatsoever, you get some interesting results. So I can promise you'll learn a lot. And if not a fraternity, then either join or start an organization. But that concept of taking on something that's bigger than what you can accomplish by yourself is really important, and will help you along the way to becoming a founder. And the number one most important thing that you have to do before starting your own startup, or the most helpful thing, is to join someone else's. And it's really this amazing opportunity to learn and make mistakes on someone else's dime, and to take positions and responsibilities for which you are completely unqualified. So, and you only need to join a couple startups before you start getting an idea of the different patterns that emerge. And so it's a lot easier to start your own when you already have kind of seen the road ahead. The first company that I did, so it was back in 2004. I decided, okay, I'd done enough learning. I really want to try something by myself. And it was called Accolade, and long story short, it did online SAT prep. And my co-founder and I just did absolutely everything ourselves, from doing our own taxes, to taking out the trash, to researching incorporation documents. And while that's a great way to sort of learn the ropes about a lot of different things, it's pretty hard. You learn that time is your most limited resource. And despite that, even a couple years later, I sort of sat down and thought about it, and I was like, okay, like I love the SAT as much as any normal, hormonally balanced person can. But being king of SAT prep just wasn't my calling. So this is a concept that's really, it's really important that I'll come back to later. So back around when I was still working on Accolade, I actually rented a desk out of the Zobny guy's living room, and it was probably one of the most fun summers of my life. And I got to watch that company, which is another Y Combinator company, go from just concept, idea on a napkin, all the way through raising millions of dollars. And I had this sort of unique firsthand view. And I learned a ton about how financing works, about networking and Y Combinator and so on. But most importantly, it was great to have people sort of living this same kind of ridiculous, unbalanced lifestyle where all you do is, you just work and code and sleep and repeat, because you really are trying your best to build something as quickly as possible. After seeing Zobny's success, I really, and starting to see things like Justin TV come around, people who are my friends who are now going out to Silicon Valley and raising millions of dollars and meeting all these really high-profile people, I was just like, okay, I'm just going to start something and I'm going to get Y Combinator funding. I don't even really care what it is. But before that, I was still working on Accolade, and I was working across a bunch of different computers, and I'm like, it is such a pain to keep track of my stuff on all these different computers. And kind of the last straw was I was waiting for the Chinatown bus in South Station, forgot my USB drive, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to fix this, and then fired up the Python interpreter and started writing code. And sort of the lesson you want to take out of that is just some of the best startup ideas or best companies are built out of problems that the founders actually had, and it's just much easier to understand your target market if you actually suffer from these problems. And thinking about ideas in general is also, or thinking rigorously about ideas is really important. Earlier, I think Angus mentioned a book called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany. Mark Andreessen also talks about this concept of product market fit. And after spending a lot of time on Accolade without having had too much success, I had thought a lot more carefully about what I wanted to do next. So I had 3 criteria. Something that was technically challenging, something that addressed a large market, and something that you could explain to normal people in a bar or a coffee shop and have them like vaguely understand what you're talking about. And different entrepreneurs are going to have different answers to that. So maybe you want to change the world, maybe you want to do something that has to do with more of a social cause, or maybe you want to make a lot of money. I mean, it doesn't really matter, or people have a lot of different motivations for starting companies, but just know what yours are, just so that the idea of what you choose, or so that when you choose your idea, it lines up with why you're doing it. Because passion for the idea is what's going to carry you through kind of the roller coaster that a bunch of the other speakers have mentioned. So I happened to meet, actually, through the Justin TV founders, my future co-founder, and after talking, I had put together a video after filling out the Y Combinator application saying, here's this thing called Dropbox, it's like a 3 or 4 minute video, here's how it works. Code was like hopelessly not ready for production, so along with what Aaron said, one way of sort of getting the idea out there, getting feedback, learning on day 0, make a video. And that's actually how I found my co-founder. Again, we spent 2 hours together, and then decided to commit all of our waking hours for the foreseeable future together, and he dropped out of MIT and joined up. So kind of an unusual story, but this is our first office in Cambridge, kind of humble beginnings. Entryway kind of smelled like pee, like our only furniture was like a picture of a donkey on the wall. I don't know where this all comes from, but at the same time, life is kind of beautiful and pure. You wake up at 1, you code till 6, and then you sleep and repeat. And we've got our first funding from a group called Y Combinator. I'm sure you've heard that several times by now, or about what Y Combinator does. But it's really, they fill in that gap again where I said, you start with no money, no experience, and no connections, and they plug you into this ecosystem where they give you 20 other groups or 20 other startups, or they fund 20 startups at the same time, so you're all going through the exact same thing, and it's sort of like this emotional support group, which actually matters a lot more than you might think. After that, we came out to San Francisco. We moved into this building called the Y Scraper, and there were like a dozen other Y Combinator companies in there. It was a lot of fun. Thanks indirectly to Y Combinator, we got an introduction to these venture capitalists, Sequoia Capital. And they love to fund kind of the proverbial 2 guys in a garage. We met with a partner there who also happened to be from MIT, also happened to be in a fraternity. We bonded over these things, showed them a prototype and a PowerPoint deck, and it was a Friday, and on a Monday we had a handshake deal to raise $1.2 million. So just kind of a wild experience. I remember actually walking into the Bank of America in North Beach and being like, our checking account has $60 in it right now. Can it hold $1.2 million? And that's how you know you're out there, because they didn't bat an eyelash. I mean, I was in a hoodie and flip-flops, and I don't know if they thought it was drugs or startups, but anyway. They didn't ask any more questions. Again, concept of a video, putting that out there before the product is ready, doing kind of the Gmail-style private invites. That worked really well for us, for the reasons that Aaron mentioned. We also were really living lean and living frugally, so we jammed 6 people into a 900 square foot apartment. I knew it was time to go when one of our employees was threatening to quit because his desk was next to the bathroom, and we didn't have a sofa anymore because we had to put it vertical up against the wall. And this brings me to one piece of startup advice that I heard over and over and over again when I was getting started. Your first few hires are absolutely critical and set the whole culture and sort of ethic of the company. And all 6 of us in the beginning were MIT computer science grads, and we just sort of prided ourselves on working really hard. So coming right out of school, we were already sort of attuned to that work ethic, making something that was fundamentally really good, and then being really obsessive about quality. And your values will be different, and they change over time, but if you have to get one thing right, be very, very careful about your first hires. This is us now that we had a real office space and an address, and started in business cards and started to look like a real company. And there were 9 of us at that time. We were accepted into TechCrunch 50, which was our sort of public launch point. 7 months after launch, we reached our millionth user. So we had about 100,000 users at launch. 7 months later, at 1 million. Last month, we hit 2 million, and growth started accelerating again after our iPhone app launched. And today, the company is now a 20-person team, of which 10 are MIT Core 6 grads. And we're just having a great time building this. One thing that you don't see with these kinds of very quick montages of startups is how much kind of suffering that goes into them. And you know, one day you're the next Google, the next day Google is releasing their Dropbox competitor, and you're like totally screwed, and you know your investment's going to fall through. So you live like that for at least the first couple of years, where on these incredible highs and lows. So having a co-founder and a great team around you helps to buffer that, and then also having other entrepreneurs around you helps too. I want to talk a little bit about being a startup CEO and what that kind of entails. So in the beginning, it's all about, again, coding in your boxers. You are doing nothing but assessing the market and putting together a product and writing code, and it's very heads down. And you know, there's not really much room for business guys in an early stage tech startup. You are making the product with your own hands. I wrote the client, my co-founder wrote the server. But then things start changing pretty rapidly. So you have early stage and growth stage, where it's more about you're building a business and you're launching a product, and you have actual users, and you're sort of growing up, and you're managing millions of dollars. And so the reason why you have to learn a lot of these things and sort of get out of your comfort zone is because, sure, I mean, all engineers are very comfortable on the writing codes phase, but down the line, when you're trying to build something that's bigger than yourself, or bigger than your just initial team, it's all about management and leadership and persuading people and communicating. And there's kind of a culture at MIT, or at least in Core 6, where it's like, okay, that's the stuff that the Core 15 or the management people do. But you kind of, I mean, there's a reason why these things really matter. That often, comes when you only learn these things, after you've kind of poo-pooed them. But again, your job description is rewritten every 12 months, and so that to some people that might be terrifying, and it is terrifying, but it's also kind of an awesome opportunity. I mean, no other thing that you can do, or no other job profession, changes so rapidly, and forces you to sort of stretch yourself. And again, as you proceed from coding, it's more about, instead of your hands building the product, you are now building a company, a machine, a bunch of people that are then going to build the product and help the business scale. And it's just kind of an interesting challenge. I mean, so one analogy for a startup I heard was, it's like pushing the components of a plane off a cliff and then expecting you to build them on the way down. That's sort of what starting a company is like. And when you're also trying to sort of scale yourself, it's like trying to train the pilot at the same time too. So, it's if you like that kind of challenge, it's not for everyone, but there's just not going to be another point in your life where you have that kind of learning curve, or you're forced to stretch yourself. Here's something we look at a lot, just people's reactions to Dropbox. For me personally, the most satisfying thing about it is not so much the concept of like making money or these other things, but it's the opportunity to create something from nothing and put it in millions of people's hands. And that's when it doesn't always work out that way. But you only have to do it once. Or failing, you shouldn't be worried about failure, because you only have to be right once. Obviously, a lot of entrepreneurs keep doing it, but just when all these things come together, it's extremely satisfying, and it makes all sort of the long hours and the pain worthwhile. So I think I'm running a little bit out of time, so thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
What were some of the mistakes you made along the way? Any advice you can give there?
What were some of the mistakes we made along the way? Well, there's a near mistake early on where, I don't want to go too much into detail, but there was potentially another member of the founding team who was very interested in joining us, but was unwilling to give up a lot of his other obligations. And so he was more of a business guy, and I was like, great, we can have I and my other co-founder can do all the technical stuff, and he can be the business guy, but I still want to be CEO, and he wanted to be president. There's sort of these classic kind of dysfunctional situations that you can get yourself into. Unfortunately, he was getting sued, so he was busy with other things anyway. But again, hiring, like picking the right people. There's, if you do one thing right, that's what to get right.
Hi, where do you see the future of Dropbox going? And do you think that Dropbox fulfills the essential thing that you set it out to do? And are you looking into doing something else now?
So what do I see Dropbox as doing in the long term? So for this audience, actually, one way that I would explain what Dropbox is this kind of Athena, which is, if you're not at MIT, is their kind of computing infrastructure. When while you're at MIT, you have this thing called Athena. You sit down at any of thousands of workstations, and all your stuff is just in front of you, and it all just kind of works. And when you leave, nobody had really built that for the rest of the world. So that's what gets us excited. I mean, we store, petabytes of data, billions of files. It's kind of just an insane scaling challenge and business challenge. I think I might have missed the second part of your question, but.
Are you working on any other projects, or are you just completely dedicated to Dropbox?
I'm completely dedicated to Dropbox. I mean, there's this, we're starting around files, but there's all kinds of other directions that we can go. I mean, we're a long way away from you being able to sit down at any computer or device and just sort of have access to all your stuff.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I remember when I'm 50 now, so I'm a little older than the average age in this room. But I remember when I was a young engineer reading Tracy Kinner's Soul of a New Machine, which was about a bunch of young engineers who were working, huge long hours and being exploited by a big corporation. And now what I'm seeing is a lot of startups that are bubbling up, that are projects where it's young engineers being exploited by themselves. And I'm wondering if, and this is not fair to lay this on you because I've seen it on all the presenters, I think, if the monastic lifestyle that seems to go along with a lot of these war stories where people have to faceplant at their desks for 2 years is actually necessary, or is it just a cultural artifact?
So the question is, I'm just rephrasing it, so that are the long hours actually necessary or a cultural artifact? And are people kind of exploiting themselves by working so hard? So I think it's important to find the right kinds of people that are making sure that people are doing this for the right reasons. For us, we sort of saw this opportunity. If we ran really, really fast, maybe we could get ahead of the big companies and build something really big. And part of that just means putting in a lot of hours. And everybody has a piece of the company, so their success, their ultimate success, is also they're also vested in the company's eventual success. But yeah, you're right. I mean, everybody needs, and sometimes there's an element of self-awareness that's missing, where or there's an element of bravado where it's like, okay, well, yeah, I worked 100 hours last week. Oh, I worked 105 hours. I mean, there's definitely a culture of people at least claiming, if not exaggerating, how hard they work. That can, be unhealthy in some cases. So
do you think that might have something to do with the fact that maybe 10% of the people in this room are female?
That's not something I've thought about. I don't know.
Okay.
So I was thinking when you were talking earlier about Accolade, and you were saying how hands-on you guys were with every aspect of the project. I know when you've got a baby like that, it's hard. You don't really want to delegate things down. What were some of the first things when you started Dropbox that you outsourced or delegated down to kind of take it off your plate?
Okay, so the question is, at Accolade, did everything by our own hands. At Dropbox, we didn't. We raised money. So I think one of the first things, one of the first Y Combinator dinners, one of the founders, or one of the sort of recurring pieces of advice was that as a founder, your time is extremely valuable, and that's actually your most limited resource. It doesn't matter how big your company is. And so when you're making business decisions, often you should think about, okay, my time is worth, $100 an hour, $500 an hour, or if my time is worth $100 an hour, if it's worth $500 an hour, would I still be doing this? And so that was sort of an easy measuring stick to be like, okay, well, the money is, the capital is available. That's actually a pretty plentiful resource. Our time is not, so scale the amount of money you need to what you're trying to do, and then you can get more people to take some of the things off your plate that you might not have enjoyed anyway. So it's a matter of balance and delegating and scaling that to with the resources you have.
Hi. I was wondering how you and your co-founder divided up managerial, leadership responsibilities, how you decided who would be CEO, things like that.
So the question is, how did my co-founder and I divide up responsibilities and titles and all these things? It's a good question. So you want to be, in general, I was more public-facing. I was doing more of the fundraising and sort of thinking about the business. He's very focused, we're both very focused on product, but he especially is focused on what's happening, inside our four walls. And, it's a matter of lining up interest too. He just wasn't, the idea of pitching VCs was just not exciting to him, but it was exciting to me, and things just kind of fell naturally into place. Even on the technical side, I wrote the client software, he wrote the server. But in any case, it's a great point because you can run into a lot of problems when both founders want to be CEO, or where your skills or your interests overlap. And so it's really important to divide these things up early.
Looking at the website recently, I noticed that there's more of a focus on using Dropbox as a tool to have your files available anywhere versus the collaborative working and dealing with file versioning. Was that a strategic decision, and what is your company thinking about in terms of those two different uses?
Yeah, so the question is, what's the thinking behind an apparent increased focus on getting to your stuff as opposed to collaborating or any of the other things that we do. As we move from more of a tech audience to more of a mainstream audience, the appetite for giving people, or their appetite for hearing a list of 10 things that Dropbox can do is a lot more limited. So sometimes you have to focus on what's working, and just, it's better to bring someone in the door on, a couple features or one feature, and then, you have an opportunity to then show them all these other things and, allow them to discover other features. And that was much more successful than trying to cram every concept down their throat at once, at the front door. Because people just get confused.
How were you able to generate so many users, and at what point were you able to hit exponential growth?
What was the first part of the question?
How were you able to generate so many users?
So we solved the sort of critical mass problem very early on, and that's something that every startup should think really, really carefully about. And the way we did it was, the second video I did, we included a lot of Easter eggs sort of targeted at the dig community, because I remembered what it was like to be kind of 17 in high school and internet memes and all that, and there's just the very early adopter and sort of audience that would be receptive to this kind of thing. So the demo was done completely deadpan, but we snuck in 10 or 12 different Easter eggs, and that got people to respond. And then also just our, as far as the critical mass problem, our product really lined up with the kinds of things that the dig audience is looking for. So as I said, our beta waiting list went from 5,000 to 75,000 people in like a day. But at a higher level, you just have to know your customers and where they go to find something like what you're doing. All right, last question.
Okay. Hi, Drew. So in addition to Y Combinator, now startups have a lot of other seed incubators to choose from. In addition to TechCrunch 50, there's also Demo, and of course there's all sorts of partnership opportunities that I'm sure you thought of for Dropbox. Yep. I'm really wondering kind of what criteria do you have, or how did you make decisions around what opportunities to pursue or to be actively looking for, and what opportunities to leave on the table while you worked on other things or just worked on the project?
Okay, so I think there's two questions. One is about how do you think about different, it was a seed stage financing, and then the other was how do you think about partnerships in general. So with Y Combinator, I think there had been a couple of the others, Techstars, and the others had come around. We just had a relationship with them starting early on. From I knew Adam from Zobni and had sort of and a bunch of the other Y Combinator startups, so that was sort of a natural fit. And on the second point, like how do you figure out what partnerships to do? You know, there's a big danger as a startup to get really distracted. I mean, all these things sort of, all these random opportunities fly in, and it's kind of a broader topic. But at a high level, there's a lot of benefit to just staying focused until you sort of nail your core offering, and that people understand what you're doing, and that they like it, and that the response is good before trying to sort of build incremental things out on that, or build incremental things beyond sort of what you're offering the public. And we almost made some mistakes with partnering with much larger companies that would have taken the product in another direction, or saddled us with all these integration issues and things like that. So you really have to be careful, because sometimes deals, there's a lot of examples where the right deal just completely, blows a company up and in a good way, and there's a lot of examples where it blows a company up in a bad way, and you never really know until, it's often difficult to tell in advance. All right, thanks.